To get the barrel rolling on our official Unofficial Donkey Kong week, it's only fitting that we go back to the game that started it all. The game that first gave a stage to two characters that would become icons. The game that revolutionized the very concept of the video game. The game that did all this and more with 4 levels. This is the original Donkey Kong. Sort of. Technically, this is Donkey Kong as ported to the Nintendo Entertainment System. And although this version would become one of the most popular and widespread, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. But let's start from the beginning. The original Donkey Kong was really a transformative moment for video games. Released to arcades in 1981, the game became a worldwide sensation, and it forever changed the fortunes of an unknown Japanese company named Nintendo. In fact, the very landscape of the gaming industry as we know it would be shaped by the aftershocks of this one incredible game. Simply put, there'd never really been a game quite like Donkey Kong. One of the most well-designed games ever made, Donkey Kong's immediate draw is that it's simple. Anyone can understand the mechanics, and almost anyone can play the game. But like a duck that evidently swims with calm, there's something very different happening beneath the surface in Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong is complex in a way most modern games just aren't. Every barrel, every spring, every enemy, everything that impedes your progress runs on some kind of pattern. Memorization and pattern recognition are what Donkey Kong is all about. Or so you think, until a barrel seems to bounce towards you at random, shattering everything you thought you knew about Donkey Kong. See, this game fights back. It's the epitome of old-school gaming, a ridiculously fun test of your hand-eye coordination that requires an uncompromising degree of skill. Of course, the design of the gameplay aside, Donkey Kong is simply an iconic game. The first level alone, the barrel screen as it's called, is an institution for video games by itself, as charming and memorable as some entire games. By the time you learn there's actually a plot, with actual characters and actual cutscenes, all areas in which Donkey Kong was a pioneer, the charm of the game should be as unmistakable as the ground it broke. Donkey Kong tells the story of Jumpman, an aptly named hero out to rescue his lady from the clutches of her lovelorn simian abductor, Donkey Kong. Of course, Lady would later be renamed Pauline, and Jumpman would soon become known as Mario. For Nintendo fans, Donkey Kong is an embryonic look at two of the most popular video game characters in history, and there's still something magical about seeing them for the very first time in Donkey Kong. In fact, Donkey Kong captures the characters in a moment they'd never quite have again. I mean, it's fascinating to think something as iconic as Mario's red hat, something it's impossible to imagine the character without, was only added to Donkey Kong so his creators wouldn't have to animate hair. This kind of stuff shrinks these larger-than-life characters down to something less refined, something more relatable, and that's one of the real charms of Donkey Kong. Unfortunately, if this is the only version of Donkey Kong you've played, you wouldn't know much about that story, or the 4 levels I mentioned earlier for that matter, and that's the only major drawback for the NES version of Donkey Kong. Due to storage issues with early NES cartridges, Nintendo had to remove some of the content from the arcade original for this home console port. The game's second level, a cement factory with moving conveyor belts, and the animations between the levels are absent from this NES release. But otherwise, Donkey Kong is very faithful to the arcade original, and it plays virtually identically. And although the arcade game is clearly the definitive version, this NES port is certainly a recommended and even mandatory title for the console. It's incredible how playable this game still is nearly 30 years after its debut, even on the NES. And while it's disappointing to have content removed, especially given the relevance of the game's story and animations, this classic is just too good to be ignored. Whether you play this NES port or the superior arcade original, it's one of the most cleverly designed, challenging, and frankly significant video games in history.